Hello and welcome to Cosmological Arguments. I'm your host, John Bannan. Debunking Atheism, Volume 8. In this video, I'm going to go over a few common atheistic arguments, and then I'm going to explain to you how to get out of them. The first argument is that in order for something to be created, it needs to be caused. And that cause needs to interact in some fashion in order to bring about the creation. The atheist will say, well, because God is immaterial and doesn't have a physical existence, then it's impossible for God to interact with anything physical. So how is it that God can create anything if God can't interact with physical reality or the universe? And because God can't interact, then he can't create anything. Then why do you believe he's real? He would seem to be impossible. So what's the answer to this objection based on the necessity of interaction in physical reality? Well, the first thing to understand is that the term interaction implies the existence of time. There has to be time in order for the interaction to occur. There has to be time for the interaction. So, God is a timeless, uncaused being. God is not subject to time. So, right off the bat, it would seem, well, how can God interact with anything since interaction requires time? The solution to this problem, you can use the photon as an analogy to interaction without time, or what I would call non-temporal causation. The photon is a particle of light. And under Einstein's general theory of relativity, the photon does not experience time. The photon is what's considered a null geodesic. So it's wrong to think of the photon as having a frame of reference for itself. It doesn't. The photon exists in our frame of reference. We can see light travel. Whenever you turn a flashlight on, you can see light travel. But the light itself doesn't have a frame of reference. It doesn't know you're there. Light does not experience time, and it doesn't experience distance. It's a timeless particle. However, photons can cause matter to come into being or to exist. So clearly the photon is engaged in some sort of non-temporal causation. It doesn't interact in the sense that the photon experiences time, but nonetheless, the photon can cause matter. Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared, proves this. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. C stands for the speed of light. So a photon is all energy. It's all speed of light. It doesn't have mass. So the speed of light squared is equal to energy. So the photon is energy. But a photon can also be converted into mass, at least theoretically. It hasn't been done experimentally yet, but they're working on it. But no one really doubts that this is true. So if you got a whole lot of light or photons, you could create mass. The conversion of mass to energy has already been proven. An atomic bomb proves that, where uranium or plutonium is converted into energy. And among that energy is photons or light. So a photon can be absorbed and emitted from an electron shell. It can move an electron in an electron shell. And so the photon can cause something with mass, like an electron, to move further out its electron shell. And in fact, in the photoelectric effect, a photon could even move an electron out of its atomic shell and make it a free electron, a form of electricity, which is the basis of solar cells and solar energy. So it's proven that the photon can, in fact, cause things with mass, things that experience time, like atoms and electrons, to change, despite the fact that the photon experiences no time, and there's no time for the photon to interact with anything. So you're talking about an example of instantaneous non-temporal causation. So the time it takes a photon to be emitted or absorbed by an electron, it occurs instantaneously. There's no time. It doesn't take time for this to occur. It's an instantaneous conversion. So a conversion of photons to matter or matter to photons, that conversion process is instantaneous. It doesn't take up time. So the photon is an example of instantaneous non-temporal causation. So when you ask the question, well, how does God interact with reality to be able to create it? The first thing you have to understand is you don't need interaction necessarily to cause things to occur in reality. The photon does not require interaction in order to cause things in physical reality. So the answer to this first objection is, well, God does not require this sort of temporal interaction. And you use the photon as an example, by analogy, of non-temporal causation. So you don't need interaction to cause things in physical reality. God can cause physical reality to exist without interacting with it, because interaction isn't absolutely necessary for causation. You have the photon as an example of instantaneous non-temporal causation to point to and say, see, you don't need interaction in order to create reality. So the second question is, well, how exactly does God create something to appear from non-existence? Well, the answer to that is God is uncaused. And the explanation for why God is uncaused, there's many. You can look at the cosmological arguments to get an understanding of how this is possible. But the basic gist of it is that something's got to be uncaused, or we wouldn't be here. If it was just nothingness, nothingness doesn't create anything. So how could we exist if there was just nothingness? There would always be nothingness, and we wouldn't be here. So there's got to be something that is not nothing, but nonetheless has to be uncaused, because it can't be caused by nothing, because nothing causes nothing. So it has to be uncaused. It must always be the case. So there has to be an uncaused reality, and that's what we call God. But the thing with something that's uncaused is it doesn't have a causal explanation because it's uncaused. There is no causal explanation to give to an uncaused thing. So you can't explain how God creates something to appear from non-existence, because that would require a causal explanation for God, which is impossible because God is uncaused and by definition cannot have a causal explanation. Sorry. So there's no causal explanation one can give as to how God creates physical reality, because God is uncaused. There is no causal explanation. But nonetheless, something's got to be uncaused. So it has to be real. And God is real. And he's that uncaused reality that has to be real. But by definition, an uncaused reality has no causal explanation to give. So there's no way you can explain how God creates physical reality to exist from non-existence. But you can certainly use the photon to show that instantaneous non-temporal causation is real. The photon does it. And you don't need interaction for God to create physical reality. Now, the idea of non-temporal causation is an idea concerning logical causation. It's not a causation in time. Now, for example, you could say mathematics has this sort of non-temporal causation. Mathematics, you can say that 1 plus 1 equals 2. And in a sense, you can say that 1 plus 1 causes 2. That's logical causation. It's not temporal. 1 plus 1 equals 2 does not require time to be true or to exist in order for this to be a true statement. Mathematics is not subject to time, but it has these sort of causal, logical relationships nonetheless. So the photon is timeless and is, in a sense, similar to this mathematical, logical reality, this non-temporal reality or timeless reality. So if you want to think about it, you can use a ruler, for instance. A ruler is really a representation of mathematics. You got 0 to 12, and there's a bunch of numbers in between. And mathematically speaking, not on a ruler, but mathematically, there would be an infinite number between 0 and 12. So this ruler represents essentially a logical, non-temporal reality. So you can think of, sort of, as an analogy, you can think of the photon as, let's say, a spot on this ruler, like inch 1. But it's non-temporal, it's mathematics. So the creation of a particle, for instance, that has mass, and that means that it experiences time. Mass, what it means is that a photon does not experience time. It's a wave, a ripple in the electromagnetic field, but it doesn't experience time. Whereas a particle that has mass, see, a photon is massless. A particle that has mass experiences time. It has mass. It has a frame of reference from which to experience the world. A photon doesn't even have a frame of reference. To a photon, there's no such thing as time and distance. Uh, with a particle with mass, there is time and distance. It does have a frame of reference, a relative frame of reference, and you can kind of think of um, a particle with mass as a standing wave, whereas a photon is a wave. A standing wave is a particle that has mass. So, if you took two rulers, let's say, here's a yardstick and here's a ruler, and these are both, you can think of them as mathematical representations of a timeless entity. And so you may ask yourself, well, how do you get time from timeless entities like mathematics? How does mathematics create time? And the answer is it can't. There's no time on a number line, however you look at it. So how do you create time? Where does it come from? And the answer is God creates time. And I've done another explanation about the creation of time that God uses, which is the idea of occasionalism. And occasionalism is a philosophical idea that God creates reality, uh, or each moment in time, or each moment in space time. He creates it. It's a timeless act. And then he destroys it. And then he recreates it, but a slightly different, um, in a slightly different order. And time is just that sequence of creation, destruction, creation, destruction, creation. Each distinct creation is a timeless act, and there is no time in between each individual creation. But this sequence of creation is what we experience as time. Uh, so God can create physical reality and create time through this timeless act of creating this discrete, indivisible unit of time or space time, however you want to think of it. And it's just this recreation over time. Uh, the other name for that is conservation of reality, is what we experience as time. So you can look at it this way, as an analogy, really. This is just to help you understand the concept. It's not perfect, but it's an analogy. You think of the ruler as timeless reality, some sort of timeless reality that God creates in a timeless fashion. And this yardstick is another timeless reality that God creates in a timeless fashion. And you take these two And God, through occasionalism, makes them uh, change their orientation towards one another through each sequence of creation, destruction, and recreation in occasionalism. So you get something that ends up looking like this. So from mathematics, God is, through occasionalism, creating time. Now, where's the time? Okay. The intersection of these two timeless creations, this intersection right here, that little V-shaped point right there, all right, that is what, by analogy, you could think of as a standing wave, or a particle with mass that experiences time and a frame of reference. So you can see how two things that do not experience time, when using occasionalism, changing their relative position to one another through occasionalism, can create time, or this particle with mass, the standing wave. And if you think of a photon being a point on this ruler, let's say here, 11, uh, as God, through occasionalism, creates, destroys, recreates these timeless uh, creations, you can see how that photon moves away from this point of time, this particle with mass, and it moves at the same speed for everybody. The photon itself isn't moving, doesn't experience distance, doesn't experience time. That's what this experiences. This point of mass experiences time and distance. The photon doesn't. But you can see how the photon appears to be moving away from this point at the same speed for everybody, because occasionalism is going at the same rate, relatively speaking, for everyone. And it's this timeless creation of different orientations, of different positions of these timeless creations with each other, that through occasionalism is what creates time and a mass particle with mass. So the fundamental difference between a photon that doesn't experience time and a particle with mass that does experience time is that a photon is a wave, an electromagnetic field, but a particle with mass is a standing wave. It has it has its own reality, just like this intersection between these two rulers has its own reality. It's a standing wave. I hope that's helpful. So it's not true that time has always existed, um, because things can exist without the necessity of an interaction, which itself requires time. Uh, the photon does not require time, and yet it exists. So there's no need that time always exists. And in fact, time did have to have a beginning. You can look at the beginningless time paradox, which is one of the cosmological arguments, which I did a video on, which would explain to you why time has to begin. So essentially, the photon is the proof of concept that God can create physical reality without needing to interact in time. And indeed, occasionalism can create a universe that appears to be a block universe. But this God's creation of physical reality through occasionalism, each discrete creation of space-time, its destruction and recreation as a sequence, that is what we experience as the now. So the now is really this creation, this continuous creation and conservation through occasionalism by God. That's what the now is, the present moment. It's God creating. In the block universe, you have the past and the present, which under relativity are both considered to be just as real as the present moment. But the truth is, you can, in fact, through occasionalism, create a universe that appears to be a block universe and acts as if it's a block universe, including all sorts of relativistic phenomenon like time dilation, for instance. And yet, the past and the present aren't actually real. It's just made to appear to be real. And occasionalism can do that. And the only thing that is real in physical reality is the present moment or the now. And that's the moment God creates the next moment of space-time. Now, God's creation of each moment, each creation is separated by no time. It's a timeless act. But the connection between each discrete creation is the fact that they're very close to one another in order. It's like a movie film where you have a bunch of different frames. So each moment of the creation of space-time is like a frame in a movie. And then God destroys that frame and creates the next frame. And this continuous creation and destruction and recreation is like the playing of a film. And this is what we experience as time. When you look at the movie projected on the screen, it appears to be in time. Even though each frame, in God's terms, under occasionalism, is in fact a timeless act. So the film, this is an analogy film. I mean, a film is run in a movie theater, and a movie theater is subject to time. But occasionalism is not exactly like that. It's not like there is this greater time in which God is creating and destroying and creating each frame. That's not the case at all. There is no time for God. God is timeless. Occasionalism is the creation of a discrete unit of reality or space-time, but not in a greater time, not in a greater world. It is a creation. It's a timeless thing. Like this yardstick. It's a timeless thing. And then it's replaced with a slightly different timeless thing. And this is what we experience as time. But there's no time in between the change in each frame. It's only because they're similar to one another that we experience it as time. However, they are discrete, indivisible units of space-time. It's not a continuous process at all. So God himself can be timeless and yet create time through a continuous volitional act of creation or conservation, and yet not make himself subject to time. because each frame is a timeless act. It's a timeless thing. And there's no time in between each frame, and there's no greater frame of reference in which each frame is created through time. So it doesn't require time to exist because it is the creation of time and space itself. When you're talking about the creation of time, you can't be talking about something that's subject to time. That would be impossible and circular reasoning. If you ask the question, well, what creates time? It can't be something that's subject to time. Can't be. Because then you're assuming the existence of time in order to explain the creation of time. That's circular reasoning that's logically flawed and possible and impossible. So we're talking about the creation of time, which itself is not subject to time, is not done in a greater realm where time exists or that subjects God to time. God is timeless. Okay, on to the next objection, atheist objection. Well, some atheists will argue that the principle of conservation of energy or mass says that you can't create energy or matter. It can only be transformed into something else. It can't be created or destroyed. This is a fundamental law of physics and thermodynamics, and it's true. You can't create matter or energy. It can only change its form. You can't create it or destroy it. So from that argument, they'll say, well, the laws of physics, since matter cannot be created or destroyed, or energy cannot be created or destroyed, that means that matter and energy must have always existed. Because if you can't create it or destroy it, then it's got nowhere to go. It must always exist. So if it always existed, then that means that physical reality has always existed. And if physical reality has always existed, then why do you need a God? If you don't, you need a God to create physical reality. But if physical reality has always existed, then you don't need a creator. So that means there's no God. You don't need a creator. Okay, so how do you get out of this argument? So, some people will argue, well, you still need a sustainer of physical reality. Somebody still has to be in the background sustaining its existence because physical reality is all contingent and there has to be something that's non-contingent in order for these contingencies to exist because they can't be contingent on themselves. Sure, you could use that argument. A better argument is this, that the principle of conservation of energy or mass is a law of physics. And at the moment of the Big Bang and the expanded singularity first appeared, you're talking about the creation of matter and energy, or at least energy, which later turned into matter, but you're talking about creation. So isn't that a violation of the law of conservation of energy and mass? Well, it would be, except for the fact that physicists recognize that the laws of physics break down at the expanded singularity. There's a point when you go back far enough in time towards the appearance of the expanded singularity where the laws of physics break down. They don't apply anymore. So the principle of conservation of law of energy and mass as a law of physics breaks down at the expanded singularity. It doesn't apply. So the answer to this atheistic objection is, well, the law of conservation of energy and mass breaks down at the expanded singularity. It doesn't apply to the creation of the universe at the Big Bang, which is the creation of matter and energy. So it doesn't apply at that point. And physicists know this. It's admitted across the board by physicists. So the whole argument falls apart because the laws of physics break down at the expanded singularity. Another atheistic argument is that, well, we have matter and energy, and this creates physical reality. And the laws of physics are inherent to matter and energy. Somehow they're cooked inside these things. They're inherent to them. And because they're inherent to them, you don't need a cause for their existence. Matter and energy behaves that way because its inherentness, its internal engine tells it that this is what it has to do. It doesn't need a cause for doing what it does. And if it doesn't need a cause for its physics, then why do you need a God to cause it? Well, okay. The answer to this objection is that matter and energy is caused by the Big Bang. It began to exist at the moment of the expanded singularity. It was caused. And physics is just our description of the behavior of physical reality or energy and mass. So it's really a mathematical model predicting the behavior of physical reality. That's what physics is. So it's not something that's inherent in the matter and energy itself. It's not like there's a physics book inside an atom somewhere telling the atom what to do. Physics is an idea, a mathematical explanation for the behavior of physical reality, but it's a description of the behavior. It's not the thing itself. So that description is obviously also caused by the creation of the thing it's describing, the energy and the matter. And since it was caused by the Big Bang, the laws of physics are also caused by the Big Bang. The description would only exist if the thing existed, and the thing would only exist if it was caused to exist by the Big Bang. So the laws of physics are caused as well. They're not an uncaused metaphysical thing that allows for the creation of physical reality. It's simply a description of what this stuff does. Okay, one last argument, atheistic argument. Some atheists will say, well, the universe is infinite, and therefore it has always existed, and you don't need a God to explain what has always existed. Well, the answer to that is, well, the universe isn't infinite. It is not. Uh, the universe is about 13.8 billion years old. That was from the time of the Big Bang. And we know this because our science has shown that the universe is expanding. And we base that off of our observations of galaxies and the redshift of those galaxies and how intensely they're moving away from us. And this is all scientifically proven that the universe is in fact expanding. And because it's expanding, well, then that means if you go back in time, reverse time, there had to be a point where it was one thing, this expanded singularity that came into existence. So the expansion of the universe proves that the universe has only been around for about 13.8 billion years. And since it's only been around 13.8 billion years, it's only had 13.8 billion years to expand. So it can't be infinite. It would have to have been around for an infinite amount of time in order to expand infinitely. But it hasn't been around for an infinite amount of time. Only 13.8 billion years worth of expansion. So it can't be infinite. Another point is, well, if the universe was infinite, then why would it need to expand at all? Well, expand into what? It's infinite. If it's infinite in size, why does it need to expand? Expand into what? Why would you have an expansion into an infinite space? That makes no sense at all. You wouldn't need to do that. But we know the universe is expanding, so we know the universe can't be infinite. And another, a final point is, well, there's no scientific proof, actually, that the universe is infinite. None. And you also come across another problem, which is, how would you even prove that the universe was infinite to begin with? You can't, because if the universe was infinite but also expanding, then light from a certain distance would never make it to Earth in order for us to know that something's out there. Because the expansion of the universe prevents that light from ever reaching us, even though it may be traveling in our direction. Because of the expansion of the universe, it never gets to us. And of course, we're on the other side, also going away from it. So there is a limit to the observable universe beyond which you cannot see. It's impossible to see. Light will never reach us from there. So you'll never know what's there. It's not possible. So you also have the speed of light. It takes light a certain amount of time to travel to us. But the universe is also expanding at the same time. And we're expanding away from it. So it's never going to reach us. So as a practical matter, you could not prove that the universe was infinite. You couldn't prove it. You'd never be able to just see into the universe for an infinite distance. That is physically impossible. Speed of light won't allow you to do it. The expansion of the universe won't allow you to do it. No way you can prove it. But not only that, we know the universe hasn't existed an infinite amount of time, so it hasn't had an infinite amount of time to expand. So we know it can't be infinite. And there's no good reason for a universe to expand if the universe were infinite. So those are the answers to the atheistic argument. Well, the universe must be infinite. Well, no, it's not infinite. And even if it was, you'd never be able to prove it. Okay, that's it. I hope you learned something. These atheistic arguments can be on their face pretty persuasive, but there are counter arguments and ways out of them. There always are. Some of them can get kind of complicated, very complicated. When you're dealing with photons and timeless entities, but trust me, there is always an answer to these arguments. And it may take quite a bit of education on your own behalf if you really want to understand what the counter argument is. But they're there, and keep watching my videos and you'll learn more. Take care.